Hello everyone and welcome back to the program. The courage to make good things happen. That was a noble strength of the Joshua who succeeded Moses. Joshua had proven himself even before he led the Israelites into the promised land. But along the way, God still had to repeatedly encourage him, saying, "Don't be afraid. Stand up and be courageous. Wherever you go, I'll be with you," God told Joshua. He knew that Joshua needed more courage to face even bigger battles ahead. God knows that you and I need courage as well. On today's program, we'll look at what it means to be a courageous spiritual warrior for God.
The Trumpet Daily.
When he was a young man, Winston Churchill was quoted as saying, "Being in many ways a coward, particularly at school, there is no ambition I cherish so keenly as to gain a reputation of personal courage." To a young Winston Churchill, that was crucial, to build a reputation of being courageous. And if you know anything about his early life, he was a man who really rushed to the front lines, almost courting danger. Some of his critics said that he was doing it just to try to advance his career, to try to gain publicity. And I'm sure some of that motivated Churchill. But at the same time, that was another world in so many ways, where people in the British Empire, they felt like it was shameful not to be courageous, not to be bold, not to rush forward and to face down an enemy. And of course, if you look at Winston Churchill later in his life, he had that same courage to stand up against the forces of fascism when everyone else wanted to surrender. These are examples that God wants us to look to. There's valuable spiritual lessons in this history. And of course, in the Holy Bible, there's lots of history that really does encourage us to be spiritual warriors for God, courageous Christians. We'll look today at the example of Joshua. We'll start our study in Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. It says here, "Now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Eternal spoke unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel." Now, these are just words on a page to us, but if you put yourself in the position of Joshua, this was a daunting task. There were a lot of enemies that they were going to have to face heading into the promised land. And along the way, Joshua was going to need a lot of encouragement. You can see it actually in Deuteronomy 3 and verse 28, where God told Moses, "Look, go to Joshua, your minister, go to Joshua, your servant, and encourage him and strengthen him and get him ready for these battles." Look at verse 5. It says, "There shall not any man be able to stand before you all the days of your life, as I was with Moses." Here's God speaking to Joshua. "So will I be with you," God says. "I will not fail you, nor forsake you. Be strong," verse 6 says. "Be strong and of good courage, for unto this people shall you divide for an inheritance the land, which I swear unto their fathers to give them." Be strong and of good courage. And you can study into that word courage on your own time, but it means what you know it to mean. It means be bold. Be strong, be steadfast, stand up for God. This is more than just a simple, shallow belief in God, like so many in the world of Christianity teach today, that all you have to do is believe on Christ. Just accept Christ in your heart, and then that's it. No action needed, no obedience, no works, no courage. If you look into the margin for that phrase in verse 6 that says, "Unto this people you shall divide their inheritance," the margin in the King James Bible says, "You shall cause the people to inherit the land." Really, you look at the Hebrew and the meaning is a little different than what's recorded there in English. The margin, as I say, bears this out. It says to Joshua, you be the cause of all the people of Israel inheriting this land. You lead them, in other words. Let it be because of your courageous leadership that they go on in and settle the land. To do this, Joshua was going to have to face up to his worst fears. We have to do the same thing as true Christians in this very dark and evil world. Continuing on, look at verse 7. It says, only be you strong. Here's God again, encouraging him. Be you strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. See, it takes courage to stand up for God's way of life in an evil world. It takes courage to obey God. Look at the world today, and look at how much you stand out just for keeping the commandments of God. As one of the prophets says, by doing that, you're going to make yourself a prey in this world. They're going to come after you. You stand out for obeying God. And yet, God said to Joshua, look, be strong, be courageous. You can do this. I'll lead you. I'll fight your battles. Don't worry about what those enemies say. Don't worry about how formidable they look. Just stand for God. Fight for God. Look forward to the end of the book, Joshua 23. This is Joshua 23, and we'll look at just one verse over here. Here again, you see some of the same themes brought out over and again. Joshua 23, and verse 6, it says, be you therefore very courageous. It says again, to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, that you turn not aside therefrom to the right hand or to the left. Notice how God keeps connecting courage together with obeying all of the words of God's commands, following what Moses taught. Don't turn aside from it one bit. You hold on to what you've been given. You hold on to those precious truths, those laws that Moses preached on for the duration of his life. Hold fast to those traditions. Hold fast to those teachings. Back up to Joshua chapter 10. Look at chapter 10 here and verse 25. Here again it says, and Joshua said unto them, fear not, this is Joshua now speaking to the people, fear not, nor be dismayed, be strong and of good courage, for thus shall the Eternal do to all your enemies against whom you fight. He told the people, he gave the people the same message God gave to him, the same message that Moses gave to him. Now you people, you be strong and be of good courage. There were a lot of people, just going back to the example of Winston Churchill, that were terrified of this Nazi menace in the heart of Europe. But it was Churchill's courageous leadership that the people of Britain rallied around. It's amazing what courageous leadership can do for an entire people, for nations, in this case for ancient Israel. Now, when you read the rest of the history and you see what they actually went up against, they needed to be fearless and courageous because they had a lot of battles to face. In fact, if you look at the first 11 chapters in the book of Joshua, that's nearly half of the book. You look at half of the book of Joshua, and you have details really about all of the conquests, about all of the battles, about the people of Israel taking this city, and then this city, and then this city, just one after another after another. Why is this history there for us? What's God trying to teach us? Well, read in 1 Corinthians 10 sometime about what the Apostle Paul said about all of this history, about all of this information in the Old Testament. It's there for us today. It's for our learning and admonition. Because we're to be spiritual warriors for God. It takes some spiritual courage to just stand up and to act on all of this precious truth that you hear about on this program or that you read in our literature that we offer to you freely. Joshua chapter 11. Let's look at verse 15. Joshua 11 verse 15, it says, as the Eternal commanded Moses his servant, so did Moses command Joshua, and so did Joshua. He left nothing undone of all that the Eternal commanded Moses. So Joshua, listen to this, Joshua took all of that land, the hills and all the south country, and all the land of Goshen, and the valley, and the plain, and the mountain of Israel, and the valley of the same, it says. And then further, even from Mount Halak, it says, that goes up to Seir, unto Baal Gad, in the valley of Lebanon, under Mount Hermon. And all their kings he took, and smote, and slew them. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. I mean, he was at war for a long time, approximately 6 or 7 years. And this was to take the promised land. Here again, you look at it spiritually. How many preachers are out there saying, well, it takes really nothing to enter into the spiritual promised land, God's kingdom. You just believe on Christ. That's it. Well, that wasn't the way it was in the Old Testament. To take the promised land, they had to be ready to battle. They had to fight for God. They had to stand up for God courageously. And these lessons, remember, are there for us. We have to act on God's knowledge and truth, and that takes courage. It certainly takes courage in this world. Verse 19 says, there was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, save the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. All other they took in battle. So only one city didn't fight them. The rest of them they had to take in battle. They faced resistance everywhere they turned in the promised land. That's why there's so much fighting recorded in the first 11 chapters. And the lesson for you and for me today is that it takes spiritual courage to stand up for a world, or rather for God in a world that is in rebellion against God's laws, God's commands. One more verse here, verse 23. It says, so Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Eternal said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions by their tribes, and the land rested from war. So Joshua, just to go back to what I covered there in chapter 1, Joshua was the cause. He caused this to happen. He made it happen. Now, it was God who fought the battle, but it was Joshua who trusted God in faith, who followed God in faith. Notice what my father had to say in Malachi's message. It says here, it appears that Joshua of Moses' time had one outstanding strength, spiritual courage. God was instructing him to use this quality, showing him how much he would need it. It says in the Laodicean churches, spiritual courage. That's the latter-day churches of God, described in Revelation 3. And he says here, spiritual courage may be the greatest need. Without it, the other virtues are of little value. He says, finally, God's people can't cower in fear and still grow in God's love. It takes courage to stand up for God. That quote is from this book, Malachi's message to God's church today. We just passed our anniversary, the anniversary for the establishment of the Philadelphia Church of God, 28 years ago. And I mean, this was the book. This was the book that kicked it off, that got it all started. This was my father's book, a warning message to so many of God's people that you're turning away from God. You're getting lukewarm spiritually. You're lacking spiritual courage. We're offering you this book free of charge today. If you haven't requested a copy yet, we've only offered it a few times, but if you haven't requested a copy yet, make sure that you request Malachi's message to God's church. We also, just on the subject of courage here, this booklet we have available online. It's at our website, thetrumpet.com. Biblical Manhood. You see there, 7 God-given roles for men. I mean, this book is about men leading like Jesus Christ, like a real man. I mean, looking at what's happening to men in our world today, there is a great need for this information, and it's a huge book. We don't have it printed even, but you can read all of it at our website, thetrumpet.com. Just go over to the trumpet.com website, the library tab there at the top, and then you can come down a little bit to books and booklets, and then when you view all of the booklets, I mean, you can see our huge library of booklets, but just scroll down a little ways to Biblical Manhood and make sure that you download the copy electronically, or if you have enough paper in your printer, to print it off like my son has done, so that you can go through it, so that your children can go through it. But we as men in particular, fathers, husbands, we need this instruction to lead to be the cause in our families, in our communities, in our churches, to be the cause that makes good things happen. Make sure that you read Biblical Manhood, and then also request your free copy of Malachi's message to God's church today. We'll be right back.
The Former Prophets are a group of books in the Old Testament that contain important messages for us today. For example, the book of Joshua records vital instruction on how to be an effective leader for God. Joshua exemplified one outstanding strength: spiritual courage. Without spiritual courage, all other virtues are of little value. God told Joshua to be very courageous to keep and to do all that was written in the book of the law of Moses. Throughout his life, Joshua obeyed and taught all the commands of Moses, not deviating to the right hand or to the left. When people follow a leader like Joshua, who followed Moses, the results are wonderful. Standing up for God takes courage, but the majority of God's people in this end time lack the courage to help deliver God's powerful message. They have forgotten what they were commanded and have failed to hold to the instructions they were taught. To learn more about the spiritual courage needed to obey the great God, request our free book, Malachi's Message to God's Church Today. All of our literature is offered free of charge, without cost or obligation. Call now or text your request to 80800. Just type REQ followed by your name and address and send it to 80800. To request the material online, visit our website at thetrumpet.co.uk.
Joshua, see, was a warrior. He fought wars for God, and he learned to trust God implicitly in fighting those wars. And 2 Chronicles 20 and verse 15 says that the battle is not yours, but God's. Now Joshua understood that. He knew that. And you and I have to know that as well. That's a foundational lesson. The battle is not yours, it's God's if you're trusting God. He fights our battles for us. We're soldiers. It says in 2 Timothy 2, we're soldiers for Jesus Christ, and we're in a spiritual war. Many people will say, well, look, I'm too weak to do this. I'm too weak to follow God. But look, we're all too weak to follow God. Every single one of us. The primary lesson is learn, like Joshua, to trust God to fight your battles. And he did it consistently, and just consistently won battles. And ended up winning the war and giving them peace and rest in the Promised Land.
That's a clip from my father's Key of David program in the U.S., talking about Joshua, the warrior for God, and how that we have to learn, like he did, to trust God to fight our battles in that way. I mean, you can make good things happen. You can, like Joshua, be the cause. You can be the cause. Notice this quote from my father's other booklet, or book, Former Prophets. It says here, put Joshua in charge, and he will cause good things to happen in Israel. God wants us to do that as well. Cause positive things to happen, and cause successes in our lives and the lives of those that we lead. That's such an encouraging message. Be a positive force for good. That's what he's saying. And the amazing thing is, with respect to this example of Joshua, is that God could look at him and say, now I know he's going to make good things happen. I know it. This is a quote from Herbert Armstrong years ago. And it is well to realize that the Bible reveals that God does for us what we are unable to do for ourselves. Usually, He, God, will supply your need through your own efforts. Your own efforts. But if you place confidence in Him, He'll see that the need comes. See, God expects us to do our part. He'll supply the extra help. He'll give us the inspiration and the additional power. But we can't just sit back and watch Him do it all. A lot of times, as Mr. Armstrong says there, he does it, he supplies our need through our own efforts as he guides and directs us. And then as we put forth effort to follow him, to trust him, let's notice Deuteronomy chapter 3. This is verse 25. It says, this is God speaking to, or rather Moses reacting to God or responding to God. He really wanted to take the people of Israel into the promised land himself. Moses says, I pray you, let me go over and see the good land that is beyond Jordan, that goodly mountain in Lebanon. But the Eternal was wroth with me for your sakes, and would not hear me. And the Eternal said to me, let it suffice you, speak no more unto me of this matter. Moses had made a mistake, and God punished him. God said, you can't go into the promised land or deliver these people into the promised land. That was reserved for Joshua. Continuing on, verse 27, get you up into the top of Pisgah, it says, and lift up your eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward, and behold it with your eyes, for you shall not go over this Jordan, but charge Joshua, verse 28 says, charge Joshua and encourage him and strengthen him, for he shall go over before this people, and he shall cause them to inherit the land which you shall see. He will be the cause. God had confidence in Joshua's action. He knew that he was a man of action. He knew that he was a man of deeds. How would you like God to say that about you? What a wonderful compliment. I know he'll cause the people to go on in. Look at Deuteronomy 1, a couple pages back. Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 37. It says, also the Eternal was angry with me for your sakes, again Moses speaking, saying, you shall not go in there, but Joshua the son of Nun, which stands before you, he shall go in there. Encourage him, God says to Moses, for he shall cause Israel to inherit it. See, encourage him. He's going to need encouragement because there are a lot of battles coming up. And there's a lot of battles coming up for you and me too. And God will provide encouragement. But make sure that you provide action. Make sure that you're the cause of good things happening in your life or in your household. Let's get back to Joshua chapter 3 and just see how much time we have to finish this study. Joshua 3, this is in verse 14. And it came to pass when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, and the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as they that bear the ark were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water. Well, this is basically the Israelites crossing into or over into the promised land. You can read the rest of the verses there yourself. But here, to get them into the promised land, God, again, it took courageous leadership from Joshua, but God also performed a mighty miracle together with Joshua's action. He parted the waters of the not the Red Sea like he did with Moses, but the waters of the Jordan River. Another Red Sea-like miracle. Pretty amazing. Here's Joshua 4 now, and verse 1. It says, and it came to pass, when all the people were clean passed over Jordan, that the Eternal spoke unto Joshua, saying, and notice what he says here, verse 2, take you 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe, and command them, saying, take you hence out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, 12 stones. So he gives Joshua these instructions to gather up 12 stones and to build this monument or this memorial so that the people could see it, so that they could always be reminded of this history, these incredible miracles. God wanted them to remember their history, to remember what it took to cross into the promised land. He wants us to learn from these lessons. Down in verse 9 it says, and Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests which bear the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there unto this day. Don't ever forget this precious, precious history, God says to them. Verse 10, for the priests which bear the ark stood in the midst of Jordan until everything was finished that the Eternal commanded Joshua to speak unto the people, according to all that Moses commanded Joshua. And the people hasted and passed over. They had all rallied around Joshua and his courageous leadership. Joshua took the lead. Joshua was the cause. Joshua made good things happen in Israel. And God really blessed him and rewarded him because of that. Notice what verse 14 says. On that day, the Eternal magnified Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they feared Moses all the days of his life. See, God magnified that man. He loves these kinds of examples. He wants to put them right in front of us and tell us and communicate to us. This is what it takes to obey God. This is what it takes to serve God in these very dark and troubling times. The world is in trouble. Look at it. Look at the world. Look at the news. Look at the headlines. Look around you. Don't just get caught up in your own little world. Look at the world as it is. We need God. We need God's help. Verse 21 says, And he spoke unto the children of Israel, saying, When your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean these stones? Well, here's Joshua just giving instruction about, when your children come and ask, you make sure that you tell them this history, that they know this history. Like my father says in Malachi's message to God's church today, spiritual courage. That may be our greatest need today, to stand up and to fight for God and to have courage like Joshua. You can read about that in Malachi's message. Make sure that you request this free book. There's no cost. There's no follow-up. We offer it to you free. Just call our operators today. And then don't forget to go over to the Trumpet.com. There's only electronic versions of this available. You can get it at the Trumpet.com at the Books and Booklets tab. Just scroll down, or even just go to the website and type in Biblical Manhood on the search function. And that will take you right to this wonderful booklet. Both of these books are offered free without cost or follow-up. We thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you again next time.